When we start to ask the question, what will it take to survive in the 21st century for it to be sustainable, it's pretty obvious that we now live in a global village which will require a global ethic if we are to survive. Some of you who follow global warming politics will know with the Garneau report that the science is in, that if we can't particularly get China to sign up to a post-2012 agreement, we are really in trouble. And therefore, to have skin in the game, Australia actually needs to be saying, as a country with per capita the highest carbon footprint, we are taking seriously our part in this and amending our ways and setting specific targets. And please, this is now a global issue where you're seeing what we're doing, take it seriously. It remains to be seen whether Australia can have that sort of leadership. As you know, a 3-year election cycle, where at the moment the opposition is saying, well, why should we lead? Why should we sacrifice? Why should there be any pain for us? Is meaning that the politics of despair that says no point having the right policies to save the world if you can't win the next election may in fact cause a failure of leadership and a failure for Australia to have that sort of skin in the game. If ever before, we needed a global ethic to actually connect that the environment is what the game is about, that the economy, which we're saying don't touch our lifestyle, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, that unless we get this into our heads, we, as a race, are in serious trouble. Which is why I'm so thrilled to see Engineers Without Borders doing the work it's doing, and other NGOs starting, and I hope a movement of people that really starts to say it's movements that change the world, not politicians. Politicians can and will only ever act in terms of what's electorally possible and what they can pull off. Politicians need movements. They need movements to set the agenda, to lead, to put pressure on them, to, in fact, create the opportunities where they might do the right thing, even when they know what the right thing is to do. Which is why so many of you and organisations like Engineers Without Borders taking seriously global poverty, taking seriously the seamless interconnection between global warming and global poverty. What we know in World Vision, we've been around 50 years, is that global warming is threatening to wipe out 50 years of development work. When we started back in, well, it's longer than 50 years, 1950, there were 50 natural disasters in Asia. In 2006, there were 250 natural disasters. And though people might argue whether there is a linear, straight causal line between global warming and all of those disasters, there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that global warming has been one of the major reasons we are having to respond in humanitarian ways, which of course is the story of Burma. Cyclones like this don't hit Burma, they bypass and they go up to Bangladesh. Ask any Burmese, they'll tell you that. And it's changed. That's why the population in the world, the nation in the world that has the most awareness of global warming is Brazil, because everyone knew, every Brazilian knew, cyclones don't hit Brazil. And then they did. And suddenly there was this, things have changed in the world, in the weather patterns. So let me actually talk about Burma and a bit about China and put it in the context of civil-military engagement. If you're sitting there, as most Australians think about these issues, they see no controversy in a convoy of life-saving aid being escorted by military forces to communities through remote and dangerous territory. These forces would be an essential ingredient, you would think, in the safe delivery of essential aid, to prevent it being hijacked or wasted or distracted and stolen along the way. And of course to ensure the safety of aid workers. Up till when the UN leader in the embassy in Iraq, a magnificent Portuguese man, with a lot of other UN officials, were bombed, that would, and killed, that would have been the understanding of the military-civil engagement, that military protects because you're just trying to help. Aid workers are not targets, whether they're UN or NGOs. Tragically, since that moment, it has all dramatically changed. Today, there is great debate, even in the aid community, around the questions of neutrality and independence, and what is always an NGO's first priority, to protect its own workers, to say in sending people there, is it safe? The responsibility to do that's pretty obvious, but you forget that aid workers are today's real heroes. When the Department of Foreign Affairs is telling people to get out, it's too dangerous, our aid workers are going in. So as NGO, your first priority, given that they've assumed a whole lot of risks, is to protect them and to look to military authorities, as you once did, under the banner of an NGO flag, to assume neutrality. Well, that's all changed. An increasing number of conflicts today are driven by very irregular military forces, ethnic, political, often criminal militias in nature. And such ethnic forces with religious agendas or agendas of national liberation, insurgency, often are seeking to control precious resources. Some of you know the phrase, the curse of wealth, the curse of resources. Essentially that means that if diamonds or gold are discovered in a country, you can predict that in 5 years that country will be poorer, there will be far greater conflict, because it is a rational choice to say in very poor countries which have resources, a coup d'etat makes sense, to have a quick shorthand cut to seizing those resources and becoming wealthy. Joseph Kabila, whose son now is still ruling of sorts in the Congo, by the way, which is the greatest humanitarian crisis on the earth, and we know very little about it. Between 2000 and 2005, 5 million people died in the Congo, outweighing Darfur, where I've been. Another terrible tragedy. Darfur is a place where we see the world condemn that as genocide and then go on acting normally, not really doing anything about it. But the Congo is even worse. Well, Joseph Kabila, whose forces came in from Rwanda, said, to actually run a coup d'etat, to overthrow a government, just takes $5,000 and a satellite phone. And the way it works is that $5,000 buys you a few soldiers who are very poor, who, because of some payment, will line up with you. The satellite phone means that as you march toward the capital, you just do deals with foreign national governments, giving them concessions over the logging or the resources, or a tenth or a fifth of those resources. And they pay you money that then allows you to recruit, as you keep marching, more and more soldiers. That's the nature of the instability and the sometimes rational choice about people saying, if there are resources and it's poor, let's go. So, within the aid community, you now discover that government forces are hostile to aid reaching their own populations. World Vision has been conducting research for the past 12 months, asking our staff on the ground. We've got 30,000 staff around the world, so, our staff, people often think World Vision staff in Australia go and do all the work. In Indonesia, it's Indonesian World Vision staff, or Mozambican staff, or wherever they are. And in surveying many of these staff, who are in the most turbulent and conflict-ridden areas, about their experience and their relationship with military actors, it's a very disturbing picture. We've now talked to staff in 27 countries, diverse internal displacement camps, staff in the Republic of Congo to the slums of Bolivia, and the evidence is quite overwhelming. We found that working alongside the military is anything but straightforward as it once was, in terms of they saying you are neutral and giving you protection. In fragile contexts, government forces, along with liberationist or paramilitary groups, have a much greater vested interest in ensuring no assistance reaches communities that they regard as enemy, or that they regard as taking the aid they can use to win the hearts and minds of those resources. Most recently, when World Vision got suspended in Zimbabwe, we've been feeding nearly 10% of the population. Before the election, Mugabe suspended lots of NGOs. He said, I'm going to deliver the food aid that you have been delivering. People who want that food aid will have to produce their ID cards. We'll take those ID cards and ensure they vote the right way. The politics of brutal hunger to manipulate an outcome. So what do you do in these contexts when the possibility of neutrality, the ideal for all of us when engaging with really desperate populations, means that the forces that you once regarded as maybe cooperating with you out of some humanitarian ideal, those very forces limit the perception of an NGO's neutrality in the very communities receiving aid. So this is now a huge challenge in a very volatile, unstable world. How to manage aid agencies' engagement with military forces in a balanced way that limits threats to perceived impartiality of the organisation, that therefore tries to protect your staff, the first priority you have, and accepts that aid workers among local populations aren't seen somehow as even belligerents themselves. It's a balance which requires very context-specific decision-making, and certainly in the dialogue with governments around funding and engagement, how you go about this. If you want to read more about that, there's a very important book called A Bed for the Night. And the author talks about what happened after Rwanda. As you know, 100,000 people died in about 8 weeks. 1 million people died in about 8 weeks. It was, in terms of a genocide, one of the fastest and most terrifying in 1994. And those who were mainly to blame, the Hutus, when the war turned against them, fled into the camps that World Vision and lots of other NGOs ran. And the principle of neutrality that David Reef, his name R-I-E-F-F, in A Bed for the Night, said, meant that we took them as victims and we fed them. And what did they do in those camps? There they reorganised their militias and they went back to killing and fighting again. The whole ideal of neutrality, as you can see, is never that simple. And then how were those camps and organisations who were seen to have fed the Hutus who came back perceived by the Tutsis and the others who were driving them out? Well, most recently I was up in Myanmar, Burma. The context was Cyclone Nargis, and there it is an extremely complex relationship with the military. I was one of the very few who got a visa to go in there. I actually rang DFAT. I got the personal phone number of the Burmese ambassador who's in Canberra. And I rang him. And I said, my name's Tim Costello. I'm from World Vision. He said, Tim Costello, I've seen you on TV. I said, well, that's great. And World Vision's there. We have 500 or 600 staff, Burmese staff. We need to get in to support them. Many of those staff had lost loved ones and they too were in grief. He said, oh, well, no, my governments are not doing that. We've got it under control. And then he said, but I've seen you on TV. And don't ask me how or why, but I got a visa. Virtually nobody else got one. There's some reward for celebrity, quote, quote. Well, when I got up there, World Vision was not working in the Irrawaddy Delta. We had agreements with the government about where we worked, and so we weren't allowed to go down there. We were distributing in Yangon. And in those areas, the government, which had said to the world, yes, we need your help, had then obviously explained to the world what they meant by that. You can fly goods in as long as your staff unload those goods, get back on the planes and fly out. The narrative, of course, was that it was the Burmese military, Aung San Suu Kyi's father, in fact, General Aung San Suu Kyi, who won independence from the British, and there was the great colonial liberator, that the nation state was created by the Burmese military, that the military protected the nation-state, guided the nation-state, and in its hour of need, the nation-state would be rescued by that military too. So here was a narrative that said, of course, we don't want foreign workers and foreign press and everybody else coming in. We don't want them connecting maybe with Aung San Suu Kyi, and who knows how it gets out of control. We don't want another Bande Aceh. Their GAM, the Liberation Movement, fighting a war which meant no foreigners were in Bande Aceh, saw with the response to the tsunami, so many media and others coming in, that it forever changed the political context, thankfully for good. The GAM came down out of the hills, there was a negotiation around autonomy, some of the GAM freedom fighters were elected in democratic elections. So you can see the fear, quite rational, at the back of the minds of the military in Burma. We fear what might happen and the trickle effect of all of this. Well, the fact was that Cyclone Nargis created particular difficulties because of its scale. Some 160,000 people we know have died. Another 40, 50,000 are missing. Almost certainly the death toll will go to 200,000. In terms of its impact on Burma, this is much greater than the tsunami's impact on the 7 countries it devastated. So here was a scale of suffering that was impossible to hide from the outside world. And it also made it impossible for a government in one of the poorest countries in the world to respond to alone, to keep its narrative in place that we can do it. As in most disasters, the military was put in charge of the response. But if you know about the reputation of the military in this country, its reputation is for brutality, corruption, and for scant regard to the needs of the people. Many of the people in the Irrawaddy Delta are Karen, Christian, not Buddhist, and fighting for independence in some parts of the country. So they didn't actually care if they died and no aid got to them. That would actually solve a problem. The tensions came to a head, as you know, when the government refused to allow in international technical experts, UN, NGO and the rest of us, to assist in planning the response, though it was way beyond their own capacity. And the government literally took control of all material assistance that entered Burma. It would arrange the distribution of this aid alone, and this created an extraordinary dilemma for the aid community. On the one hand, there was a humanitarian imperative. This is why we exist. You cannot not respond. It created great problems for the government. Kevin Rudd and Stephen Smith, who were bringing me when we were up there, wanted to respond, but were absolutely furious that Australian aid would actually arrive and then be distributed to the military. The humanitarian imperative here said Australians have to be doing something, but we had no control then over what happened.